Hey folks, it's me, Mr. Lang, and today I want to talk to you about the nervous system. And this video might actually become two videos because it is going to be kind of long, I think. Before we get started, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to think about this big picture inducing prompt. And in order to do that, you're going to have to pick one thing that you've read about neuron function and describe how it's connected to something else that we've learned about. As I go through the way that neurons work and send action potentials along their axons and that sort of thing, you want to be thinking probably about diffusion, active transport, the membrane structure, structure and function, those sorts of things, because those are all essential to what's happening in your nervous system and what's happening in my nervous system right now. So that's what I want you to be thinking about, and I want you to be sort of focused on how some of those other concepts that we've talked about over the course of the year are integrated into the nervous system and all the systems. But anyhow, so here is a picture of my lovely family. You've got Nurse Josie, we've got Zoe, we've got Ben, and of course we've got me. We are standing here on top of a mountain. I think that this is Mount Madison, and Mount Adams is right here, and Mount Jefferson is right here, and then Washington is hiding in the background. Not positive about that angle, but here we are, and we got here somehow. And the way that we got here is because we fired millions and millions of action potentials through our nerves. In fact, just me standing there fires millions and millions of action potentials. And just to bring it back for a second to our previous unit, all of those action potentials being fired cause a lot of cell respiration to be happening. So here I am eating some cheese on top of a mountain. And this is Jefferson with clay in the background, I think. Or maybe I'm on clay. I don't know. Anyways, those are in the White Mountains, by the way, and you should go climb them because they're great. So really important for you to understand general neuronal function because you literally can't do anything without properly functioning neurons. So here is how your neurons are set up. You've got sensors in your body. You know you have sensors in your body. You've got eyes. You have structures in your ears. You have structures in your mouth. You have structures in your nose. You have structures in your skin. And all of those things allow you to take input from the world and bring it to your brain. So basically the way that this works is we have sensory input that then goes into your brain for processing. Without some sort of processing going on, that sensory input might as well not exist to you. So if you didn't have pain receptors in your skin, nothing would hurt. If you didn't have an optic nerve coming from your eyes, you wouldn't know that light existed. If you didn't have a tympanic membrane in your ear to pass vibrations onto the cochlea in your ear, sound wouldn't exist. You wouldn't know what you were missing. It wouldn't be a thing. So in order to sense the world around you, you have to have these sensory receptors. Then we process that in our brain. We could have those sensory receptors, and if we didn't have the processing ability in our brain, we wouldn't interpret those inputs as one of our senses. And then once our brain has processed things, it can send a message out through a motor neuron, and that motor neuron is going to make some sort of action happen. It can make a gland excrete hormones. It can make a muscle contract or relax, so I can do things like this. That's the whole point. Couple of really important terms here. We've got a sensory receptor. That's going to be your eyes. It's going to be your olfactory bulb in your nose. It's going to be your taste buds. It's going to be your heat, cold, and pain receptors in your skin, those sorts of ideas. We've got sensory neurons that bring that to the central nervous system, which is going to be, the central nervous system is going to be all the neurons that are in your brain and spinal cord. And then those can send a message out to an effector, which would be a gland or a muscle. And sensory neurons and motor neurons, we'll talk about this more later, but sensory neurons and motor neurons are part of your peripheral nervous system. Your brain and spinal cord neurons, those are called interneurons because they're inside the central nervous system. Another look at this from a more real perspective. Here we've got We've got a neuron that's here. We've got some more pictures of neurons just so you get an idea of sort of what they look like, and then we'll get into the more conceptual drawings of neurons as well. So here we've got two neurons, and this is sort of how you want to think about neurons. When you see a conceptual version of a neuron, usually it's far less complicated, but basically we've got a cell body here and a cell body here. This is two neurons. And up here we've got structures that are called dendrites. Up here we've got the structures that are called dendrites. And then we've got a main axon going this way, and a main axon going this way. And we have axon terminals down here, and then you don't see as many because maybe they're behind me, some axon terminals down here as well. And these two neurons are doing what's called synapsing, which basically means that the axon terminals of one are meeting up with the other one, with the dendrites of the other one. And that's how neurons are going to communicate with each other via action potentials. And I know I've said action potentials a few times now, and I haven't explained what they are, but I am going to tell you soon. So basically what's going to happen is a signal, an action potential, is going to be sent down the axon to the axon terminals, and the axon terminals are going to release neurotransmitters. And you've heard of some neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine. You've heard of them. You might not know exactly what they are, but that's the chemicals that these neurons are going to use to communicate with each other because they don't physically touch each other. There's a gap between the axon terminal of one and the dendrite of the other. So they don't actually touch, and that space in between my fist and my hand, that's where we're going to release those neurotransmitters. And there's going to be receptors on the dendritic side that are going to allow that communication to continue. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So more conceptual idea here, if we're talking about like a sensory neuron, here are the dendrites. Those are the things that are going to be either reaching out to pick up, little particles in the air to help you smell, or be attached to your taste buds to let you taste, or be attached to stereocilia in your cochlea that allows you to hear things. And what's going to happen is that's going to generate a signal. Cell body's here, sometimes it's further up. Neurons can be almost any configuration. The cell body can be kind of spread out in different places along the axon, but the axon's here. We have the axon terminals down here. Interneurons are very, very highly complicated. So you've got the dendrites up here, you've got the axon and the axon terminals all branching off here. And if you were to look at those interneurons that are part of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, really the brain is just a mass of neurons, spinal cord is a mass of neurons, and both of those things are used for processing of signals that are coming in. And for regulatory functions, and they have to be in contact with lots and lots of other neurons to make things happen. Think about the complexity of me just talking right now. It is insanely complicated for me to have all of the muscular control of my tongue, my lips, my lungs, my vocal cords. The fact that I'm just sitting up right now and I'm not falling over is all because of the processing that's happening in my interneurons, in my brain and spinal cord. And then this is another this is an invertebrate motor neuron, which really kind of simplifies things a little bit. We've got our dendrites, we've got our cell body, we have our axon, we have our axon terminals down here. So here is sort of how things are gonna work. This is sort of a generalized neuron, really conceptual version of a neuron. These are my dendrites, and if you like trees, if you're maybe going to be a forestry major or something like that, you are going to take a class called dendrology, and that's like a tree ID class. And you can see this kind of looks like a tree. That's why these are called dendrites. So these are dendrites. Axon terminals are down here. This is the axon here. So we have dendrites, our cell body, this purplish thing is the nucleus. And then right here, they don't show it, but this is called the axon helix. And that's an important part, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Then we have the axon down to the axon terminals. So the way that this is set up, there's sort of some extracellular fluid, just like there always is, between cells. And that extracellular fluid is sort of rich in sodium. Um, and then also, the inside of the axon, which is right here, this part here is represented by this part here, that's rich in potassium. So we have sodium on the outside, we have potassium on the inside, we have other ions as well. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to set up a scenario where the outside of the axon, that extracellular fluid outside of the axon is slightly more positive than the fluid on the inside. And that's really important. You have to have that differential. And what's going to happen to make this signal get sent is the cell body is going to collect information from all of its dendrites, and it's going to reach this point called the threshold. And if it reaches the threshold potential, it's going to cause voltage-gated channels in the axon helix to open, and that's going to allow sodium to rush in. And that's going to change the charge down further, which is going to allow more sodium to rush in. And after the sodium is rushed in, that's going to cause potassium channels to open, and the potassium is going to rush out, which is going to change. It's basically going to reverse the polarity of the membrane. It's going to depolar. I wish they called it I wish they called it reverse polarity or something. They call it depolarization. You don't get rid of the polarization, you swap the polarization. So what's going to end up happening is the inside, for a very brief time, is going to become slightly more positive than the outside. And that literally is the signal that gets passed along the neuron. So once we've reached threshold potential, the cell body opens some voltage-gated channels at the beginning of the axon, and sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out, which opens up voltage-gated channels down further. Sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out, which opens up voltage-gated channels down further. Sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out. You get the idea. All the way down here until we get to the axon terminal, where that action potential causes the release of some neurotransmitter out into the synapse space. Remember, between the axon terminals of one neuron and the dendrite of the other, where there's receptors. So that's sort of an important idea. It's also really important to realize that just after that depolarization travels past any given spot, sodium potassium pumps kick in with the help of ATP, and they're going to pump the sodium back out and the potassium back in. And you know that sensations can be strong or weak. So for example, you can hear a quiet sound or you can hear a loud sound. You can feel a really cold sensation when you touch ice, or you can feel a cool sensation when you touch the table. You can feel a little pinch, or you can feel what I felt yesterday when I caught my finger in channel locks when I was trying to do some tub repair. So the frequency with which this cell body is sending action potentials indicates to your brain how strong the signal is. So if you're touching something cool, maybe you're sending signal, 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 action potential, action potential, action potential, action potential. But if you're touching something really, 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 really cold, you might have signal, 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 really, really, really fast in succession. And that frequency with which the cell body is sending the information is going to be the thing that is going to that's going to be the thing that's going to determine how your brain interprets the strength of the signal. So yeah, that's the basics of how it works. I am going to cut this video off and I am going to make a part 2 so that we can talk more about the intricacies of how that signal gets sent, that action potential is generated and how it's sent. And we will come right back to that in just a moment.